Fine, go ahead. Those 2 words. That's how it started. Not with a handshake, not with an apology. With permission. The kind a man gives a dog when he decides it's amusing enough to watch. Nobody in that boardroom moved. And Harrison Quaye didn't move either. He sat there in his gray maintenance uniform, one hand resting on the edge of the mahogany conference table, the other folded in his lap, and he did not flinch. He had learned a long time ago not to flinch. You spend 30 years in rooms where people look through you, you either learn that, or you spend your whole life bleeding. The man who'd said it, Callum Drewe, was still smiling. The kind of smile that costs nothing and means nothing. Callum Drewe, 53 years old, third-generation money, founder of Drewe Capital Partners, a man whose name was on a building at the University of Toronto, a man who had shaken hands with 3 prime ministers and never once needed to remember any of their names afterward because that was the kind of man Callum Drewe was. People remembered him. He did not need to return the favor. He had said, fine, go ahead the way you say it to a child who insists they can do a cartwheel. Indulgent, contemptuous. Waiting for the fall. The room had 41 people in it. Drewe Capital's annual leadership summit. The top floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, Lake Ontario visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the kind of view that cost $400 a square foot. There were catering staff moving quietly along the edges of the room. There were executive assistants with tablets and earpieces. There were 7 board members, 11 managing directors, 9 VPs, 6 guests from institutional investment firms in New York and London, and 1 man in a gray uniform with the words Facilities, Drewe Capital, stitched above the left breast pocket. That man was Harrison Quaye, and Harrison Quaye had not been invited. 3 hours earlier, the summit had begun without incident. The caterers arrived at 7. The facilities crew arrived at 6:30 to do a final sweep, dust the baseboards, replace the hand towels in the executive washrooms, make sure the espresso station was stocked, confirm the projector cables were connected, check the sound system. Harrison was part of that crew, had been for 2 years. Before that, he'd spent 8 months at the Marriott on Front Street doing the same thing. Final sweeps, invisible labor, rooms made perfect before important people arrived to make them imperfect again. He was 51 years old. He had a face that held its age gently. A few lines around the eyes, close-cropped gray at his temples. The kind of stillness in his expression that some people read as slow and others, if they were paying attention, recognized as something else entirely. He had been doing the sound check when it happened. The AV system for the summit used a modular setup. Wireless microphones, a speaker array, 2 wall panels with touch controls. One of the panels wasn't reading the input properly. Harrison had seen this before. He pulled up the diagnostic menu, cycled through the signal routing, identified a mismatch in the output channel configuration. Standard. He fixed it in 4 minutes. What he did not know was that Warren Fitch, the young AV contractor Drewe Capital had hired for the summit, had spent 40 minutes staring at the same panel without solving it. Warren Fitch was 26 years old, technically credentialed, completely stumped. He had stepped out to make a phone call to his supervisor when Harrison walked in and fixed it. Warren Fitch came back to find the problem solved. He asked around. Someone told him the facilities guy had done it. Warren Fitch did not report this to the event coordinator. He reported it to no one. He let it be assumed he had solved the problem himself. This matters. Because 40 minutes later, when the same issue reappeared in the secondary speaker array on the north wall, Warren Fitch stood in front of it, looking at his tablet with the particular expression of a man who has already used up his one idea. Harrison was still in the room. He had been assigned to monitor the AV station during the summit, a task he hadn't been asked to do before, but the regular AV monitor had called in sick and someone needed to stay. He noticed the north wall drop almost immediately. He got up. He walked to the panel. He began working. That was when Callum Drewe walked in from the side door, mid-conversation with 2 of the New York investors, and saw a man in a gray uniform standing at the AV wall. Drewe stopped mid-sentence. "Hey." He said it to the room, not to Harrison specifically, the way you'd say, "Hey, if you notice someone's left a window open." An announcement, an inconvenience. Harrison looked up. "What are you doing?" Drewe asked. "Sound panel on the north wall dropped signal," Harrison said. "It's a routing issue. I'm rerouting it." Callum Drewe looked at him the way certain men look at tools, not with contempt exactly. With a kind of functional assessment. Is this useful or is this in my way? We have an AV team for that, Drewe said. Yes, sir. I'm coordinating with them. Then why are you touching it? Harrison held Drewe's gaze for exactly 1 second. Not a challenge, just presence. The quiet insistence of a man who knows he is standing in his own body and has nothing to apologize for. Because I'm the one who can fix it, Harrison said. The room shifted very slightly, the kind of shift that happens when someone says something true in a place where truth is rarely spoken plainly. One of the New York investors, a woman named Petra Voss, from a fund based in Midtown Manhattan, glanced at her colleague with the smallest movement of her eyebrows. Her colleague looked at his shoes. Callum Drewe smiled. Well, he said, let's see it then. Harrison Quaye was born in Scarborough, Ontario. His mother came from Accra. His father came from nowhere. He was gone before Harrison was old enough to have a memory of him that wasn't secondhand. His mother worked 2 jobs for most of Harrison's childhood. She cleaned offices on weekday evenings. She worked a cash register at a grocery store on weekends. She sang in the church choir on Sunday mornings because that was the 1 hour of the week that belonged entirely to her. And she guarded it the way people guard things they cannot afford to replace. Harrison was the kind of child who took things apart to understand them. Radios, clocks, the back of the television once, which had resulted in a consequence he did not remember fondly. His mother had not yelled. She had looked at him with an expression more exhausting than anger, the expression of a woman calculating how much this was going to cost. And then she had turned and walked back to the kitchen, and that had been enough. He learned to put things back together as carefully as he took them apart. He graduated from a technical high school in Scarborough. He won a bursary. He enrolled in electrical engineering at Ryerson, what they were calling Toronto Metropolitan University now, though Harrison still sometimes thought of it by its old name, the way you keep calling a street by what it used to be called even after the sign changes. He was good, not just good. His professors used different words for him at different points in his career there. Disciplined in his 2nd year, exceptional by his 3rd. Wasted in a classroom by the time he completed his undergraduate degree with a thesis on fault-tolerant signal processing in distributed audio systems that got cited in 2 engineering journals and read by approximately 400 people in the world, which in academic terms was a very respectable number. He went to work for a broadcast technology firm in Mississauga. He spent 11 years there. He rose through the technical staff, then into systems architecture, then into something that didn't have a clean title, but that essentially meant he was the person they called when a problem couldn't be solved by anyone else. He worked on broadcast infrastructure for 3 federal elections. His work was in the background, as it always was, the kind of infrastructure that is only noticed when it fails, which, under Harrison's watch, it did not. His name appeared in no press releases. His photograph appeared in no annual reports. This was fine. Harrison was not a man who needed his photograph in things. He married a woman named Denise, a high school biology teacher from Hamilton, sharp and funny and unwilling to accept nonsense from anyone, which was exactly what Harrison needed from a partner and exactly what she provided. They had a daughter, Imani, who was 22 now and working at a software company in Waterloo and had her mother's mouth and her father's quiet certainty. Then the firm was restructured. The word restructured doing the same work it always does, making inevitable something that did not feel inevitable to the people it happened to. Harrison's division was dissolved. 51 people. Gone in a Tuesday afternoon meeting with an HR representative who brought bottled water and spoke in the passive voice throughout. Positions have been eliminated. Packages will be distributed. Support resources are available. Harrison was 50 years old when this happened. 50 years old with a mortgage in Etobicoke, a daughter whose student loans he was helping with, a wife whose teaching contract was part-time that year, and a set of skills so specialized that the market for them, it turned out, was narrower than he had spent 2 decades believing. He applied for 43 positions over 6 months. He got 4 interviews. He got 1 offer, which he declined because the commute to Hamilton would have required 4 hours a day and the salary was lower than what he'd been making 12 years earlier. He took a job with a facilities management company because the bills did not care about his thesis, because the mortgage did not care about his 11 years of systems architecture, because Denise had taken on a second part-time position tutoring students on Saturday mornings, and Harrison was not a man who could watch the person he loved carry weight alone without doing something about it. He was good at the job. He was always going to be good at it. A man who can diagnose fault-tolerant signal processing in distributed audio systems can diagnose most things that go wrong in a building. The other facilities staff liked working with Harrison, though they were never entirely sure why. He didn't tell many jokes, didn't talk much about sports, didn't fill silences with noise. What he did was show up on time, solve problems efficiently, and treat the people around him with the same even-handed respect he had always extended to everyone, which a facilities crew is, in practice, a remarkable quality. He had been assigned to Drewe Capital for 2 years when the summit happened. He did not think of it as a demotion. He had decided at some point in the previous year not to think of his life in those terms anymore. Demotion implied that his value lived in his job title. He no longer believed that. He was not sure he had ever fully believed it, but now he was certain. The panel came back. Harrison rerouted the signal path through the secondary bus, bypassed the corrupted input channel, and restored full audio output to the north wall in 7 minutes and 40 seconds. He knew the time because there was a clock on the AV panel and he had looked at it when he started, and again when he finished, the way he always did, not to prove anything, because he measured things. That was who he was. The summit resumed. Callum Drewe did not acknowledge what had just happened. He moved back into the room, resumed his conversation with the New York investors, and let the moment dissolve the way powerful men dissolve the moments that don't serve them, without comment, without weight. But Petra Voss watched Harrison cross back to the AV station. She watched him sit down, fold his hands in his lap, and return to his monitoring posture. Still, attentive, completely untroubled by the exchange, she filed this away the way people who have spent careers watching rooms file things away. The trouble started at 11:47. The summit had moved into its second session, a roundtable on institutional investment and infrastructure development in Northern Ontario. Drewe was moderating. He was good at it. The performance of listening, the strategic question, the way he directed conversations without appearing to direct them. This was his gift. He had built a $2 billion fund on it. There was a microphone panel at the far end of the table, built into the surface, 6 inputs. One of them, the input at position 4, which happened to be in front of Owen Baxter, a managing director who had a tendency to talk more than anyone else in the room, had been experiencing intermittent dropout for the past 20 minutes. Harrison could see it from the AV station, a recurring signal fault, 1.8 seconds every 4 to 5 minutes. Not serious. Annoying. He had flagged it to Warren Fitch, who had nodded with the confidence of a man who does not know what he is looking at and does not intend to find out. At 11:47, the dropout became a sustained failure. Position 4 went dead. Owen Baxter's voice disappeared mid-sentence, and the room produced the specific discomfort of technical failure during an important meeting. The clearing of throats, the exchanged glances, the immediate performance of everyone pretending they hadn't all just heard silence where there should have been sound. Warren Fitch looked at his tablet. Harrison got up. He walked to the table. He crouched down beside position 4, opened the panel access beneath the tabletop, and looked. This was when Callum Drewe leaned forward. "What," Drewe said, "is happening right now?" It was not a question. It was the announcement of a problem. Harrison did not look up immediately. He was assessing the connection. There was a loose termination on the XLR input, a physical connection, not a software fault. Someone had plugged the cable in at a slight angle, and it had worked itself loose over 3 hours of ambient vibration from people moving in their chairs and placing coffee cups on the table. 40 seconds, maybe 60, to reseat the connection properly and test it. Loose connection at input 4, Harrison said, still not looking up. "I'll have it back in under a minute." "That's not what I asked," Drewe said. Harrison looked up then. Drewe's expression had changed. The indulgent amusement from the morning was gone. In its place was something colder, the expression of a man who has allowed a small thing to expand and is now annoyed that it has expanded. "Why is a maintenance worker doing this?" Drewe said. "I'm coordinating AV support for the summit," Harrison said. "You're a janitor." The room went very quiet, not the polite quiet of a technical interruption, a different quiet, the kind that happens when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Harrison looked at Callum Drewe for a long moment. "I'm Harrison Quaye," he said. "I'm part of the facilities crew. Right now I'm fixing your microphone." "I didn't ask who you were," Drewe said. "I asked why you're touching equipment at my table." "Because it's broken," Harrison said. And that was the problem, in the end. Not that Harrison had said something wrong, that he had said something simple and true in the flattest possible way. Without qualification, without apology, without the softening that Callum Drewe's position in the room required people to perform around him. The man had spent 53 years in rooms where his presence altered the behavior of everyone else, where people bent slightly in his direction the way plants bend toward light, and Harrison Quaye had looked at him and said because it's broken, as though they were two men of equal standing and the only thing that mattered was the microphone. Drewe stood up. There are moments that happen in slow motion in the telling of them, and this was one of those moments. Every person in the room registered, at some level, that something was about to occur that would matter later. The way barometric pressure changes before weather. Drewe walked around the end of the table. He was a tall man, 6'2", broad-shouldered, the build of a man who had played rugby in university and kept a personal trainer into his 50s. He walked with the casual certainty of someone who has never had to think about whether they had the right to be somewhere. He reached Harrison. He put his hand on Harrison's shoulder, not gently, and pushed, not a shove, a displacement. The specific force of a man moving an object he has decided is in his way. Harrison stepped back, not far. He caught himself immediately. His face did not change. "I want you," Drewe said, very quietly, very clearly, out of this room. The room had 41 people in it. Every one of them was silent. Every one of them was looking somewhere that was not at Harrison or Drewe. The specific studied neutrality of people who have decided, collectively, not to see what they are seeing, except Petra Voss. She was looking directly at Drewe, and she was not performing neutrality at all. Harrison straightened. He looked at Callum Drewe. He looked at him the way a man looks at something he has already accurately assessed and simply needed to confirm. Then he reached back down, seated the XLR connection properly with 2 deliberate movements, and stood up. "The microphone works now," Harrison said. He walked back to the AV station. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. The room did not know what to do with this. 41 people, collectively uncertain. Someone coughed. Someone else refilled their coffee. Drewe stood at the end of the table for a moment, the posture of a man waiting for a resolution that has not arrived, and then he walked back to his seat and sat down. "Right," he said. "Where were we?" The summit broke for lunch at 12:30. Harrison stayed at the AV station. He had brought his lunch, a container of rice and chicken his wife had packed the night before, and he ate it at the station because leaving the equipment unmonitored during the break was not procedure. He ate slowly. He did not look upset. He looked the way he always looked, present, attentive, occupied with his own thoughts in a way that did not require the outside world's confirmation. Petra Voss came to him during the break. She walked across the room with her coffee and stopped at the AV station and looked at him with the directness of a person who has made a career out of assessing things quickly and accurately. "That was handled very well," she said. "Thank you," Harrison said. "What's your background?" she said. She asked it the way engineers ask it, not small talk, professional assessment. "Electrical engineering," Harrison said. "Systems architecture. I spent 11 years at a broadcast technology firm in Mississauga. Worked on distributed audio systems, broadcast infrastructure, signal processing." Petra Voss said nothing for a moment. "And you're doing AV monitoring for this event," she said. "Facilities work," Harrison said. "For now." She looked at him a moment longer. Then she said, "Do you have a card?" Harrison reached into the breast pocket of his uniform. He kept them there, the small stack of cards he had ordered 18 months ago when Denise had told him to stop being ashamed of what he knew. The card said Harrison Quaye, BSc Electrical Engineering, Systems Architecture, and had his phone number and email. He gave one to Petra Voss. She looked at it. She put it in the inside pocket of her jacket. "I'll be in touch," she said. The way people who mean it say it, without the softness people add when they don't. The afternoon session began at 1:15. At 2:41, a different problem presented itself. Not an AV problem, a building problem. A ventilation fault in the HVAC system that caused the temperature in the boardroom to climb 4 degrees in 18 minutes. This was noticed by everyone and commented on by several people and caused the kind of low-grade physical discomfort that makes it difficult to listen to presentations about infrastructure investment in Northern Ontario. The building facilities manager, a man named Ted Okafor, who had been with the building for 9 years, came up and conferred briefly with Harrison. They walked to the maintenance panel in the corridor outside the boardroom. Harrison looked at the diagnostic readout. He identified the issue: a damper actuator fault in the secondary duct serving the top floor, a component he had flagged in a maintenance report 6 weeks earlier and that had not yet been replaced. He rerouted the airflow through the tertiary duct, reducing capacity by about 15% but stabilizing the temperature. The room cooled. People stopped commenting on the temperature. The session resumed. Ted Okafor looked at Harrison afterward and said, "You flagged that 6 weeks ago." "Yes," Harrison said. "Nobody acted on it." "No!" Ted shook his head slowly. This was the particular frustration of people who maintain things. The awareness of problems that exist before they become incidents. The documentation that goes unread. The actuator that costs $300 to replace and $3,000 to deal with when it fails at the wrong moment. Harrison knew this frustration intimately. He had been writing reports in one form or another his entire career. He had learned, over time, not to measure his value by whether anyone read them. They returned to the boardroom. The session continued. At 4:15, the summit moved into its final session. A keynote address from a guest speaker, a professor from the Schulich School of Business at York University, who specialized in Northern Ontario resource development and had published 3 books and advised 2 provincial governments, and who had driven to the summit that morning from his home in Brampton in a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a coffee stain on the passenger seat. His name was Dr. Winston Ibarra. He was 61 years old. He had a round face and wire-rimmed glasses and a voice that seemed to occupy rooms differently than most voices, not loudly but completely, the way good bass lines do. He had done his undergraduate degree in economics at McMaster, his PhD at the London School of Economics. He had spent 20 years as a professor, written 3 books, consulted for the federal government on Northern resource policy, and twice declined positions in cabinet because he did not think government was where his work would be most useful. He had driven to the summit alone because his assistant had taken a family leave and he hadn't gotten around to hiring someone new, which was the kind of logistical gap that accumulated when you spent most of your time thinking about things more important than logistics. He arrived at 4:03, slightly late, carrying a canvas bag and wearing a jacket that had been well made about 12 years ago and was honest about its age. He came in through the service entrance because the directions he'd been given were not precise, and the service entrance had been the first door he'd found unlocked. He walked into the boardroom from the side corridor. The first person to see him was Harrison. Harrison recognized the name from the event documentation. He had read it during his morning setup, the way he read everything, and he recognized the face from a documentary on Northern Ontario development he had watched 18 months ago when he was trying to understand the industry context of his facilities assignment. He was that kind of person. He read things. He watched things. He understood the rooms he maintained more thoroughly than most of the people who occupied them. Harrison stood and said, "Dr. Ibarra, you're in the right place. Can I get you anything before you begin?" Dr. Ibarra looked at him with mild surprise, not at the question, but at the quality of the welcome. Something in the straightforwardness of it. "Water would be good," he said. "Thank you." "Of course." Harrison got it. He came back with a glass, which he set on the lectern, and then he returned to his station. Dr. Ibarra watched him go. Then he looked around the room. He had been in many rooms like this one. He had learned to read them. He set up his notes. He waited to be introduced. Callum Drewe did the introduction. He was smooth at it. Professional, appreciative, the right amount of context without too much. He mentioned the books. He mentioned the provincial advisory work. He mentioned the Schulich professorship. What he did not mention because he did not know it and would not have known where to put it if he had, was this. 3 years earlier, Dr. Winston Ibarra had been the lead author on a federal policy report on Northern Ontario infrastructure investment that had directly informed a $2.4 billion federal commitment to resource corridor development. The report had taken 2 years to write, involved 47 researchers, and had been cited in Parliament 4 times. It was the kind of work that does not have a single name attached to it in public, the kind of work that lives in footnotes and policy annexes and the changed behavior of governments, invisible to everyone except the people who know how to read for it. Dr. Ibarra stood up and spoke for 40 minutes without notes. The room was quiet in the specific way. Rooms become quiet when someone is saying things that are actually worth listening to. Not the polite quiet of people performing attention, but the real quiet of people whose thinking is being reorganized by what they're hearing. At one point, Dr. Ibarra said something about the relationship between infrastructure investment and community economic stability that caused Petra Voss to write something in her notebook and underline it twice. At another point, he said something about the long-term failure modes of resource development projects that treated northern communities as extraction sites rather than stakeholders that caused three of the managing directors to look at each other with the expression of people who are going to need to revisit several assumptions. Callum Drewe listened. Harrison watched Drewe listen. Drewe was doing the professional thing, the nodding, the engaged posture. But Harrison could see the slight resistance in him, the way certain people receive information that challenges their model of the world, processing it through a filter designed to minimize its impact. At the end of the 40 minutes, Dr. Ibarra said, "I want to take questions, but before I do, I want to say something about the building I'm in." The room shifted slightly. "I came in through the service entrance," Dr. Ibarra said. "And the first person who greeted me, the first person who knew who I was, who welcomed me correctly, and got me what I needed before I had to ask for it, he was sitting at that station." He pointed at Harrison. 41 people turned to look at Harrison Quaye. Harrison did not move. His expression did not change. "I don't know his full story," Dr. Ibarra said. "But I've spent a career in rooms like this one, and I can tell you that the people who actually understand how rooms work are rarely the ones in the expensive chairs." He paused. "That's not an insult to anyone in this room. It's an observation. Observation is what I do." He opened the floor to questions. The questions ran 40 minutes longer than scheduled. No one left. Afterward, the room broke into the specific social dispersal of the end of a long summit. Clusters of conversation, the exchange of cards, the performance of connection. Catering staff moved through with small plates of food that nobody had asked for. Petra Voss crossed the room. She went to Dr. Ibarra first. They spoke for several minutes. She knew his work, had referenced the Northern Corridor report in a fund analysis the previous year, had questions that were specific enough to tell him immediately that she had actually read it. Dr. Ibarra's expression shifted into the particular quality of a person being engaged by a peer, rather than an admirer. Then Petra Voss said something to him quietly. Dr. Ibarra looked toward the AV station. He walked over. Harrison was breaking down the AV setup, careful, methodical, coiling cables the right way, the way people coil cables when they know what cables cost and what it costs when they fail. "Harrison Quaye," Dr. Ibarra said. Harrison looked up. "Petra tells me you're an electrical engineer." "Yes." "Systems architecture." "Yes." Dr. Ibarra nodded slowly. "She also tells me what happened this morning." Harrison said nothing. "I'm putting together an advisory panel for a federal infrastructure initiative," Dr. Ibarra said. "Technical Implementation Working Group. We've been trying to fill a systems integration role for 4 months. The people we've interviewed understand policy or they understand systems. Finding someone who understands both has been," he paused, "an exercise in patience." Harrison looked at him. "I'd like you to come in," Dr. Ibarra said. "Not for an interview. To talk. And then if the talking goes the way I think it might go, we can discuss what comes next." Callum Drewe was 12 feet away, speaking with 2 of the New York investors, the posture of a man who had already moved on to the next thing. Harrison looked at Dr. Ibarra for a moment and Harrison said, "End of next week," Dr. Ibarra said. "Brampton, my office. I'll be there," Harrison said. Dr. Ibarra extended his hand. Harrison shook it, firm, unhurried, the handshake of a man who had been shaking hands with people who mattered his entire career without anyone noticing. Dr. Ibarra held the handshake a moment. He said, quietly, "Not for the room, just for Harrison. Rooms like this one always know less than they think they do." He walked away. Harrison finished breaking down the AV setup. He coiled the last cable. He packed the equipment cases. He put on his jacket, his own jacket, not his uniform because the work was done and he had a train to catch. He picked up his lunch container, now empty, and his bag. He walked to the elevator. Ted Okafor was waiting for it too, heading down to the facilities office to write the incident report on the HVAC damper. "Good day," Ted said. Harrison thought about it. "Useful," he said. The elevator came. They got in. The doors closed on the 41st floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, where 41 people were rearranging their understanding of what they had witnessed, and where Callum Drewe was shaking hands with the New York investors, and where a lectern held a glass of water that nobody had remembered to clear, still 3/4 full. Harrison rode the elevator down. He thought about the cable he'd coiled. He thought about the XLR connection he'd seated properly. He thought about the HVAC damper he'd flagged 6 weeks ago, the report that had gone unread, the actuator that had eventually failed on schedule and been fixed in the margin of someone else's important day. He thought about his wife, who would be home by the time he got back, who would ask him how it went, who would listen to the whole thing with the particular focus she reserved for the things that mattered. He thought about what Dr. Ibarra had said, about rooms, about who understands them. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. Harrison Quaye walked out into a late afternoon in October, the lake somewhere to the south, throwing light off the glass buildings, the city making its ordinary sounds. And he walked to the station the same way he had walked to every station at the end of every day for 2 years. Steadily, without hurry, with the unhurried certainty of a man who has always known exactly what he is worth and has simply been waiting for the room to catch up.